Hi, welcome to another In Focus. I'm Caroline Glick. So I want to talk about Biden's visit yesterday, but I want to talk about it in the framework of Hamas's warfighting doctrine, because I think when we understand what Hamas's doctrine is, we can understand the implications of the Biden visit more clearly. So Hamas operates according to the same doctrine as the other terrorist organizations, the other jihadist terrorist organizations that have long been fighting Israel, starting with the PLO, Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, moving to Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and then in Lebanon to Hezbollah. And the doctrine is always the same. The doctrine says essentially, you start a war with the Jews by attacking them and causing as much death and mayhem as possible through terrorism. So, sometimes in recent years, it's been missile strikes at Israeli population centers that paralyze the country and send millions of Israelis to bomb shelters at whenever you want. When you shoot missiles indiscriminately at population centers and you wait and you get a desired result, which is panic, which in some cases, but particularly before we had the Iron Dome missile defense system up and running, you cause death. And then Israel responds, usually with precision airstrikes against your targets that they can find, sometimes with some limited ground incursions into Gaza that can last anywhere from a few days to several weeks. And in the course of Israel's counterstrike, you put out a blood libel where you accuse Israel of killing a large number of innocent Palestinian civilians, or you discuss or generally, and you claim mass suffering, starvation, death by thirst, whatever, of the civilian population in Gaza. And those calls, those slanders of Israel and protestations of suffering fall on the ripe ears of the West, of the United States, of the UN, of the EU, and the media that parrot your claims, attack Israel, castigate Israel, condemn Israel as the oppressor who's harming innocent civilians in Gaza or in Lebanon, who's wantonly killing innocents and is no better. In fact, it's worse than the terrorists who have just massacred its people, because after all, they are the victims and Israel is the oppressor just because. And then the UN springs into action, seeking to condemn Israel for its wanton slaughter of innocent civilians. And the US comes in and begins restraining Israel and saying, okay, enough is enough. Let's reach a ceasefire. And the ceasefire is generally mediated by an Arab country, by Egypt in the case of Gaza, that it was Mubarak, and then it was Sisi who come in and they mediate and they reach some sort of an agreement between Israel and Hamas, or Israel and Islamic Jihad, or whatever, or Israel and Fatah, and then things calm down. Hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in international relief come into Gaza and rebuild everything. The vast majority of that relief effort is diverted by Hamas to rebuild its infrastructure of terrorism, and then they rebuild their terrorist capacities and they expand them. They train for the next round. They open it, and then it all goes on again. They assault Israel. Israel responds. They accuse Israel of war crimes. The international community sides with them and says that indeed Israel is guilty of war crimes and Israel must stop and we must get a ceasefire as quickly as possible. Israel is restrained by the United States, and that round of war ends. Hamas rebuilds stronger than ever, attacks again. So today, because Hamas's one-day Holocaust on October 7th was several orders of magnitude greater than anything we've experienced in the past. We're seeing the same rounds, but it's become a grotesque caricature of everything that we've seen before, but it's the same playbook. So just, I don't know whether I need to give this scale, but I will anyway. During the Palestinian terrorist war between 2000 and 2004, when we had the rash of suicide bombings in all of our major cities, we had all of these roadside shootings on our highways, particularly in Judea and Samaria and Gaza, but not only, and just massacres on buses and cafes, etc. The single deadliest month of that more or less 4-year terrorist campaign against Israel that was waged by PLO, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and all of them together. The single deadliest month was March of 2002. In March of 2002, 130 Israelis were killed, and it was the instigator of Israel's counteroffensive in Judea and Samaria called Defensive Shield, where Israel restored its control over the Palestinian population centers, major cities, and villages. And here, what we're seeing is on October 7th, in one day, it looks now like the death toll is going to reach 1,700. We now have 203 confirmed Israeli hostages being held in Gaza. And so this is more than 10 times the number of the single worst month of the Palestinian terror war of 2000 to 2004. So, and I think all of us are in a state of that ranges from tears to fury. I mean, I don't know how many times a day I find myself crying because every news story that we see on the news, or I see on the photos of the victims and their stories online, it makes you cry again. And today I was struck by the story of the Zohar family. Ariel Zohar is 13 years old, and he was living with his family, his father and his mother and his 2 sisters in Kfar Aza. And on Saturday morning on October 7th, he went out for a run. And while he was out running, the terrorists came into his house and massacred his family. And so it was a couple of weeks before his bar mitzvah. And Ariel just yesterday buried his entire family. And he was standing there with his grandfather, the only survivor of his family, who is a Holocaust survivor. And so the body recovery team that recovered his parents and his sister came to visit, and he asked if they could bring him the tefillin that his father had given him ahead of his bar mitzvah. And Ariel, the tefillin that he received have been going. It's in generations of boys in his family have received the same set of tefillin. And it's a disaster that his grandfather saw his entire family annihilated in the camps and in the Holocaust, and then Ariel saw the same thing happen in Israel to his family. And yeah, and so that's what we're going through. And so this is orders of magnitude higher. We have full families from Kfar Aza who are dead. We have other families that are all captives in Gaza. There's one family, I think 10 members of the family are being held hostage. So this is orders of magnitude greater than anything that we've ever experienced. But what's also orders of magnitude greater is the rush to reach stage 2. Because it's like, okay, this massacre is unspeakable, and so let's move as quickly as possible to stage 2. And it really did happen on October 7th, on October 8th, when people, before Israel had counterattacked at all, when we're still fighting and trying to kill all of the terrorists who came into Israel, who are still in Israel fighting, we already have an international pile-on beginning to take form, say, well, Israel, when you counterattack, you better abide by the laws of war. And that's, of course, the line that President Biden used in his first speech after October 7th, that he gave the day after October 7th, where it was an amazing speech. And, I'm more suspicious perhaps than most people are of Biden's intentions, but I was moved by his speech. But I saw very clearly the paragraph that he put in there warning Israel that we have to abide by the laws of war. That quickly became the only sort of remaining aspect, aside from the verbiage, that formed the basis then of the Biden administration's policy for cooperating with Hamas in stage 2 of their war plan, which is accusing Israel of atrocities. So almost immediately after Israel began its aerial campaign to soften up Gaza ahead of the ground invasion with the goal of destroying the Hamas regime, we had the Americans coming in and saying, you have to worry about humanitarian support. I talked about this in our last conversation about how Secretary of State Tony Blinken sat in our war cabinet on Monday for 7 hours and demanded that Israel allow so-called humanitarian aid into Gaza, which is just resupply for Hamas, because Hamas controls Gaza and everything coming into Gaza is under Hamas control. So anything going into Gaza is going to Hamas. And so when you talk about humanitarian aid, you're not talking about humanitarian aid, you're talking about aid to Hamas. And so Tony Blinken demanded that Israel accept this or risk U.S. support for Israel's war effort, including the munitions that we need in order to prosecute this war successfully. And so Israel sort of agreed, and then Biden came on Wednesday, and he again repeated this demand in his meeting with the war cabinet, and then he announced happily that Israel had agreed to humanitarian aid to Hamas, and said, wow, if Hamas uses this aid, then we're going to know that they don't care about the civilians in Gaza. Well, we all, of course, already know that because, they're willing to raise their homes to the ground. They've been shooting people trying to get away to stop being their human shields. They've been shooting people. They've been stealing their cars so that they can't run away from Gaza City. They hate their people. Duh. Look what they did to us. And then we had, lo and behold, when Joe Biden was on his way to Israel, we have the alleged bombing of Al-Ahli hospital in Gaza. And so the Biden administration is demanding humanitarian aid. And on Tuesday night, we get this alleged Israeli aerial bombing of Al-Ahli hospital, which made no sense from the outset, because you look at Al-Ahli hospital and the inside of the hospital was not bombed out. Everybody was screaming and everybody's on gurneys running around like any, self-respecting Pallywood producer would have them do. But, 500 people dead. How do you know this? Like 5 seconds after the hit, how do you know? And what's that secondary explosion if Israel hit a hospital? Well, and then it took Israel an hour. Probably we should have just denied it and said photos to follow, but we didn't. We said we're checking, which I think that was a mistake. But if you know that you didn't bomb it, then say we didn't bomb it, and we'll bring you the photographic evidence afterwards. At any rate, who was making these allegations against Israel? The so-called Gaza Health Ministry. What's the Gaza Health Ministry? Hamas. So Hamas is the same people who butchered the Zohar family and dozens of other families and killed 1,700 Jews. Those same people are making these allegations, and they're not being treated with a grain of salt. The entire international media in every language was taking these press releases from Hamas and reporting them as fact, just simultaneously. In every major newspaper, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal in the United States, The Independent, The Sun, the Times of London, in Britain, all of you, every single major and minor media outlet in the world was running this story as fact. Israel killed 500 civilians at Gaza hospital in deliberate bombing, wanton bombing. Then, the proof came that it wasn't true. And even after Joe Biden arrived in Israel Wednesday morning and said, no, it was the other team, apparently, meaning Israel didn't do it, you still had all of these supposedly respectable media organs saying, well, no, we don't know. Sky News tweeted today, it's all shrouded in mystery. Yes, it's shrouded in uncertainty is what they said. Who was responsible for the bombing? You mean, is it Hamas or Islamic Jihad? Because it's certainly not Israel. But they can't let go of it. Why can't they let go of it? Well, that's the whole point. How is Hamas able to do stage 2 of their war-fighting doctrine based on blood libels against Israel as just this reliable tool of war right after their initial strike on Israel? Because people want to believe it. Why do they want to believe it? Because they want to believe the worst about Jews. Why do they want to believe the worst about Jews? Because they don't like Jews. So you have this beautiful narrative of the Palestinians, which is that the Palestinians are the victims and the Jews are the oppressors. And, it's always inconvenient when the truth gets out, when they slaughter full families and they behead 40 babies and they torture parents in front of the children and the children in front of the parents. And then they shoot them while they're eating their food, and then they shoot them all in the backs. That's what happened, for instance, in one instance, at least that the body part recovery teams were discussing today, and or yesterday, I don't know. But this is inconvenient. These stories of what they do, of their crimes against humanity, of their genocide, they're not good. So everybody wants to move to stage 2. That's why everybody was poised with that story about Israel not abiding by the laws of war before Israel opened its shop, before it moved any of its operations into Gaza and outside of its own territory, where it was trying to kill the terrorists that were still remaining in its territory after the initial assault. Because that's the best part of the story. That's the part where the Jews aren't allowed to win because they're evil, and it works. So so this brings us to Biden's visit. So Biden came here on Wednesday, and he gave these touching addresses. And, he hugged Prime Minister Netanyahu on the tarmac in Ben Gurion Airport. And then they met and they had kind words. And he talked about his solidarity with Israel and the Holocaust and how America is siding with Israel. And we're going to do this together, which is all very nice. But then you get to the program. And what's the program? The program is to resupply Hamas. That's the program. That's what he came away with. He came away from Israel with this program, just the same one that Tony Blinken forced down Israel's throat at the War Cabinet meeting on Tuesday. Said, you gotta open up the border with Rafah for humanitarian aid for all of these innocent, suffering Palestinians. And by the way, I just want to say parenthetically, Hamas is supported by the vast majority of Gazans, and after the initial invasion of Israel by the 1,500, 2,000 terrorists that came in, you had several thousand Gazan civilians who followed them, right? These mobs. They came in, they looted the homes of the Jews who had been massacred. They raped Jewish women. They took some of the hostages are being held by these civilians, innocent civilians, right? Who they brought back to Gaza to rape them there too, right? And they're being held there. So innocent civilians, the only victims inside of the Gaza Strip, pure victims inside of the Gaza Strip today, are the 203 Israeli hostages. But nobody talks about them because what the world wants to talk about is that Israel's the oppressor. So this blood libel of the hospital was perfect. The only problem is it wasn't true. Nobody wants to let go of it. How did the Biden administration greet the story? They were going to ask Israel tough questions. This is what John Kirby said aboard Air Force One. They're going to ask us tough questions to those Israelis. So Biden comes in and he makes Israel agree to give resupply to Hamas under the euphemism of humanitarian aid. And even more unbelievably, he announced that the United States was going to give the Palestinians, aka Hamas in Gaza, $100 million of relief aid, meaning they're going to fund Hamas. And there's other stuff too, the aircraft carriers, equipment, that's all good, except, not clear what it means really, because when reporters asked Biden aboard Air Force One when he was flying home, whether, what to make of reports that he had agreed that the U.S. forces, the aircraft carriers, etc., were going to defend Israel in the event that Hezbollah opens a war. He said, no, that's not true. So he denied it. In his own words, he said, no. So what are the aircraft carriers doing there? Who are they deterring? We talked about that in our last discussion. Where the Hezbollah keeps escalating its attacks. They were actually mobbing, they're attacking U.S. bases in Syria and in Iraq today. Iraqi Hezbollah was. It's just, Iran. And now the United States is under attack. The embassy in Beirut is being mobbed by Hezbollah operatives, and also in Amman. There's a 10,000 person riot outside of the Israeli embassy, which is, I assume, empty in Amman, but also outside the U.S. embassy in Amman. So, maybe they're just there to defend American bases and forces. That could be. At any rate, he said they're not here to fight with Israel. So again, what was a policy that he implemented while he was on the ground here? It was a policy of rhetorical support for Israel and concrete support for Hamas that goes hand in glove with Hamas's expectations, which is that stage one, they assault Israel. Stage two, they plead to the international community as victims of Israel. And the international community swings into action, and America restrains Israel and resupplies them. And then they rebuild. And so, it's always bad and it's always grotesque. But here it's gotten to the point where, you look at it and it's like a caricature of a bad, of an ugly picture. So it's just, there's nothing funny about it. It's ghoulish. It's ghoulish how terrible it is, right? Because what it means is that, Israel can be nuked and the Jews will be blamed for it. That's what it means. I mean, it's gotten to the point where the idea that anybody can worry about the suffering of the Gazans after what they did, it means that Jewish lives are worthless. Worse than that, that people like dead Jews, but just dead ones. And there's been a lot of gossips, rumors going through the mill here in Israel. Are we scaling back our war aims? There was a report, I think in Ma'ariv today, that the IDF is letting reservists go home, and that the ground invasion of Gaza has been postponed indefinitely, and that Israel's limiting its war aims. There have been a lot of rumors about that we're going to go with what the Americans want and leave Hamas in power and just have a limited operation in the north. All of this is unconfirmed, and all of this is speculation. But that's clearly, where the Biden administration is trying to push Israel, that we shouldn't take over Gaza. He said in his remarks, you have to think about the day after, who's going to be in charge of Gaza. Can't be Hamas, can't be the PLO. They're the same thing. They both want the annihilation of the Jewish people. They're both terrorist organizations. So not sure, but not the people who are in charge today, right? That's basically the Israeli line. Better us than them. And it's true, we're not cut out. The Americans failed to occupy Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, we're not interested in doing that. But on the other hand, if it's us or them, it's got to be us. And so far, all they've proven is that it's got to be us. So the Americans are, they're pushing this thing. Biden was asked on the plane whether the chance of an Israeli ground attack had diminished as a result of his visit, and he said, well, there are a lot of different options on the table, and our people and their people are looking into it together in their discussions, and meant military to military. But his response was essentially, we don't want them to invade. I mean, that was the undercurrent of what he was saying, which is clear, because if you're wanting to resupply Hamas and you're accusing Israel of denying humanitarian aid to them and forcing Israel to resupply Gaza and not achieving any goal towards, freeing the hostages, and that doesn't seem to be on your agenda at all, except rhetorically, so it's understandable that there are all of these Israeli reports concerned that the government is going to be, giving up. And there are two things that have to be said on that. One is that they better not dare do that, because they'll be out on their ear within, like 3 seconds. But beyond that, not all things are under our control. In fact, as October 7th proved, many very large things are not under our control. And, when you look at the forces gathering both against the United States and their forces in the region and against Israel, of course, and Hezbollah over the past couple of days has been stepping up its attacks, the not only the quantity but the frequency of the missile attacks on northern Israel is increasing. It's rising all the time, and the question of whether the Northern Front becomes the major front or not is not, at the end of the day, going to be something that Israel decides unless we decide to decide it. And the United States are saying you're not allowed to preemptively attack Hezbollah. So, we are in a war dynamic, and we're not the ones right now calling the shots, at least not 100%. And I'm sure in some areas we are, but I don't know what percentage of the shots Israel is initiating and which ones our enemies are initiating. So it's hard to know, but the dynamic is that things are moving, that things are changing. I mean, we may face a disaster scenario with Egypt now, even. Sisi said that if the Gazans are moved into Egypt, that he'll declare war on Israel. And why not? If he thinks that Israel is going south, he might as well get his piece of it too, right? So, we're facing this dismal scenario, and the idea of scaling back or calming the waters is not entirely in our hands. What is clear enough, though, is that Israel doesn't have any choice, but to win, because we can't allow this dynamic to continue. Because again, the exercise, the concept, the idea, the effort to live through an experiment, to survive in an experiment of living with a jihadist terrorist organization dedicated to our annihilation, living at our doorstep, whether in Gaza or in Lebanon, has failed. And we can't continue with it. It's either us or them. And this isn't a political battle. This isn't a military battle. This is an existential battle for the very existence of the Jewish state. People like myself who have been arguing this for decades have often been accused of being extremists or whatever, but we're not, and never were. And people, who are in fancy positions maybe don't want to acknowledge it, and I don't care. Why don't you say it was your idea all along? I won't take credit for it, because the idea is the only one that will guarantee the survival of the Jewish state, that we actually have to defeat our enemies. And, with all due respect to the kind words that Biden, just showered us with on Wednesday, words no longer mean that much. The only thing that matters are actions. And we have gotten into the dynamic. We've gotten into the phase 2 dynamic of the terrorist doctrine. And the only way to extricate ourselves from this, and this is what I say, to the Israeli audience, is to not care about that window of legitimacy, because it's not real. As we saw with the jubilant reports that, the breathless reporting about how Israel killed 500 innocent Palestinians at the Al-Ahli hospital in Gaza, and then the unwillingness to tell the truth, or just say Palestinians say, as opposed to this is a lie. I think it tells the story of the power of phase 2 of the terrorist war doctrine. Blame the Jews and you win. So the Jews in this case, we have to learn the lesson and not let them or not care and just go ahead and achieve our war aims. So those are my thoughts today. It's Thursday evening. We're going into Shabbat tomorrow. Hopefully by the end of Shabbat, we'll have more clarity. There'll be less fog of war, and there'll be more movement and momentum towards an Israeli victory over these monsters who simply must be annihilated. All right, those are my thoughts, and Shabbat Shalom to all of you.